It's my great pleasure to open this conference on the question of can moral and ethical boundaries be applied to artificial intelligence. And I would ask the ambassador and permanent representative of the Principality of Monaco, who is co-sponsoring this event, to say a few words of welcome.
Delighted to co-sponsor that event. For a few years now, the UN has been working on cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, protection of our people on the questions of technology. So the Secretary General had called for a high-level advisory panel to advise him on those issues. And last March, the UN has adopted its first ever resolution with the whole support of member states. Also, I guess you know that in the Pact of the Future, there are two other documents that have been attached to the Pact, and one is on the Global Compact on this issue. So it's very timely, as states members of the United Nations are working on the governance of AI. It's not only about human personal privacy, but as we interact more and more with artificial intelligence in our everyday life, even without our own knowledge, we can ask ourselves if the artificial intelligence is being programmed to become more efficient than us. And also we have to wonder if the youth around the world that interact more through social media and technology that in person with other youth and human beings are being affected. So thank you very much. I think it's very timely to organize this event because we have to think about the consequences and prevent artificial intelligence to already how it's being done through social media, to spread falsehoods and threaten our own conscience and way of thinking. So thank you very much. We are very happy, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the panel and learning from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Picot. The event is being offered to the United Nations community in light of World Interfaith Harmony Week by the Permanent Observer Mission of the Sovereign Order of Malta. Co-sponsors are the Principality of Monaco, the Permanent Observer Mission of the Republic of San Marino, and I particularly thank His Grace Archbishop Caccia, the Apostolic Nuncio from the Holy See, for his help and support in putting this organization, this event, together. I must also thank our external sponsors for their role in enabling us to do this, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and its Executive Director, Adam Falk, the Knights of Columbus and its Supreme Knight, Patrick E. Kelly, Regent North America Group and its CEO, Dr. Selva Pankaj, Fordham University, the University of Oxford, and the Mountbatten Institute. We are grateful to all of you for your support. Artificial intelligence has captured the world's attention as its possibilities and its dimensions are being contemplated and analyzed. As seen even yesterday and today at the ECOSOC meetings next door, the specter of AI is one that looms over many substantive conversations and is being taken both seriously and into account by everyone concerned about our future. Considering that the majority of citizens of our planet belong to faith-based communities of various types and styles, it's a matter of concern that few opportunities arise to bring the topic of AI into the interfaith sphere. We hope that today's panel discussion with a world-class group of thinkers and leaders at the intersection of faith, humanism, ethics, and morals will continue a dialogue which has been started by the Secretary General's Advisory Board on AI and its report governing AI for humanity, and has continued with last week's elocution by Pope Francis entitled Antiquae et Nova on the relationship between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. I'm now going to hand over the meeting to the moderator of the event, Dr. David Gibson, Director of the Center for Religion and Culture at Fordham University, who will introduce our speakers and who will begin today's panel discussion. But before I do that, during the course of the event, if you have questions that you'd like to present to the speakers at the end in the question and answer session, we invite you to write them down on the cards in front of you, and they will be collected up by the staff of the mission. Dr. Gibson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored that you gave me the title of doctor. I'm actually just a Mr. And that should set the frame, I think, for my role here. I am, again, so honored. I'm grateful for this invitation. I'm grateful that Fordham University could be part of the sponsorship for this, but I'm so grateful as well to all the people who have made this, this wonderful event possible. I also stand, or rather sit, in awe, I think, at the real intelligence gathered here for this discussion on artificial intelligence. My sense of awe is really inspired by the by the fact that I'm a career journalist. Before coming to Fordham, I wrote about religion for various newspapers and television stations and radio stations. And the classical definition of the knowledge base of a journalist is a mile wide and an inch deep. We are the fox as opposed to the hedgehogs we have up here. So for me to pretend to any knowledge on artificial intelligence, I think would be an example of artificial expertise. And that's a sin of fake expertise that journalists have been known to commit. Hopefully not me. I'll try to avoid that today. I got my start actually in journalism working at Vatican Radio, where I should have learned humility, but it was at the Vatican and it was run by the Jesuits, not the Franciscans, who might have taught me humility perhaps. But at Vatican Radio I did learn journalism, and the genius of journalism, if it does have a genius, a virtue, is knowing what you don't know. If not humility, there is some wisdom there. And in fact, wisdom is the framing of the recent Vatican document on AI that the ambassador referenced. A widespread assumption, I think, for us laymen concerning artificial intelligence is that it provides answers, quick answers and easy answers. In my experience, there are no easy answers, and the hardest part, in fact, is finding the right question. And I think we have the right question, the most important question in the very title of this gathering. Can moral and ethical boundaries be applied to artificial intelligence? From my point of view, I think there are just two things that are clear to frame this. One, that the challenges of AI demand a unified framework that addresses the various ethical dimensions that ultimately seek to respect human dignity. And two, regardless of faith tradition, this is something we must all collaborate on to address in an urgent and comprehensive way. These are big challenges, and they require more than just an algorithm or some fancy new technology. Hence the subtitle of our event, A Humanistic and Interfaith Response. Now again, if a journalistic approach has any merit, it's about asking not just the right questions, but asking the right questions of the right people. Fortunately, we have exactly the right people with us here today. The way this will go, I'm going to introduce our two keynote presenters. They will each speak for about 10 minutes each. Then I will individually introduce our panelists, who are going to take a few minutes each to respond to them, and then we will open it up for some question and answer. And as the ambassador explained, please write down on your note cards any questions that occur to you. We will collect them and sort them, and I'll pose those questions. Our first keynote speaker is Father Paolo Benanti, a professor of ethics at the Pontifical Gregorian University. Father Paolo is a native of Rome, a third-order Franciscan and academic whose research interests include ethics, bioethics, and the ethics of technology. In 2023, the Secretary General, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres appointed Father Benanti to the UN's high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence. Father Benanti is also an advisor to Pope Francis and to the Vatican on artificial intelligence. Father?
Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished guests, thank you. It's for me a pleasure to be here to questioning technology, to make what the disciplines of ethics is used to do. Well, let me clarify the approach of an ethicist of technology to such kind of problem. Everything arises here in New York when in the 80s, London winners start to notice that every time that we deploy a technology in society, it works as a form of order and a displacement of power. Everything started with the Parkway that connecting New York to Long Island. Actually, the bridge are 3 feet lower than the standard and allow just the people that own a car to pass and deny any buses. And so they serve as a form of power and as a form of order. And now the question is it digital innovation, algorithms, and AI producing such kind of displacement of power in society? If this is the question, then the answer could help us to describe how we should put in place a governance to keep the social justice and the global justice in the right perspective. Well, to answer to this question, let me try to go in 3 different directions that I hope positively answer to such question. The first one is that we have to notice that there is a changing in reality. The reality is not just hardware made, but we are facing a reality that we can define as a software-defined reality. Probably the smartphone is the best use of that to understand what does it mean. You own the hardware, but you just have a license on the software that gives the function to such piece of hardware. You own steel, glass, and silicon, but it is good to nothing if you don't have a license on the software. The same things happen with car, the same things happen with everything. And what's the new things? That this new shifting in ownership is changing the radical rights that we have when we own something. Roman law simply recognizes 3 fundamental rights when you own something: usus, abusus, and fructus. Well, abusus is the right to destroy something, and you still have it. If you destroy your mobile phone or your hardware, well, someone is happy because you have to buy something new. Usus, it's really different. It depends on the kind of license that you have on software. And they can allow you or deny to you to use in some way the hardware that you have. But what is totally subtracted to you is fructus. All the digital economy is simple this shifting of fructus from the owners of the hardware to someone else that is offering to you a service to use the hardware. Well, this huge shifting highlights a new shifting of power in society with new subject that has a new form of power that in some cases, a lot of them, it's unaccountable to the standard check and balance principle. Well, but more than that, we have to recognize that in the world we are 8 billion, 100 million and counting people, and we own 6 million, 100 billion and counting mobile phone. But just 27 million of people are able to code. That means that 99.75% of living beings on the face of the earth are just passive users of such technology. Well, these 2 elements should describe in which way every time that we deploy a software-defined reality, and now software means artificial intelligence-defined reality, We are shifting power, we are moving power with different competence and with a not capable or without capability people around the world. Well, the second thing is what's happening thanks to the artificial intelligence in the relationship between the human beings and such kind of artifact. A lot of studies demonstrate that simple what shaped the last 10 years of digital economy is what is called the economy of attention, in which the digital platforms simple are able to monetize the time that people are spending on such kind of device, monetize the attention. But the new AI system are letting simple evolve in such kind of economy. And the economy of attention is now becoming the economy of intention. There is attention among the time. Well, this kind of deployment of AI system on the interface between the human beings and such kind of device is simple able to push to a new level all the nudging system, all the pushing on freedom and the free use of such kind of device, and the way in which we are used to assist to the production of public opinion. So this cognitive interface with the intention economy that is arising around the world is putting us on a cutting-edge question in which way or if there are rights, cognitive rights of people to know that there is an AI algorithm that is shaping or acting on them to give them a perspective on the reality. It's too easy to remember you that actually democracy bet on one idea, that is the ability of citizens to have an opinion on facts. And such kind of interface is something that can shape also the power of traditional state to have such kind of function on such kind of core element of democracy. Well, at the last point that I would like to highlight, and then my time will be gone, I would like simple to highlight how such kind of AI are producing a new shifting of power in what we can call computational power. A computer system arose after World War II, and it was deployed in society through a form that is the mainframe, a centralized computational power that simply reshape organization to use the computer. 1980, the most powerful computer was in the Pentagon, Washington, D.C., and it was used to organize all the U.S. Army. But the second one was in Kentucky, in the central branch of Walmart. It is used to shape and organize all the scaffold of the economy of the commerce and distribution of goods in the United States. Well, the counterculture arisen in the 70s touched computation. And if you remember what the counterculture was used to say, it is that everything that is centralized is not good. And so this movement, through the hippie of the Silicon Valley, produced what we call the personal computer, a personal computational power that impacts the society with a strength that is difficult to imagine. 1982, the man of the year, according to the Weekly Time, was not a human being, was the personal computer. In this century, in the first decade of this century, personal computational power became the most intimate form, the smartphone. And at the end of the first decades, well, the Arabic Spring put in our idea that computational power could simply be the leverage for the democratic system or democratic idea to spread around the world. Well, 10 years later, 2021, the riots of Capitol Hills simply push on us the idea that such kind of computational tools could be the worst enemy of democracy. Fake news, polarization, post-truth, and things like that. What happened? Well, economy, 2012, simple jump on platform. But what is interesting for me is what happened in 2020. 2020 with pandemic show us that computational power of every one of us was used to surrogate analogous life and give us the ability to participate to social life thanks to computational power. Zoom call, digital signatory, and other tools, mobile app for banking and things like that, show that we surrogate what we call analogous democracy in a new way that is computational democracy. At the starting point of this third decade, 2023, we discovered ChatGPT. And now, from the last October, there is no operating system, no mobile system that is not infused by such kind of AI system. But these systems are not able to run on edge on our personal computational power. They run in a new centralized wave of computational power that are the clouds. And now the computational democracy can be simple centralized in such kind of cloud computing system. And I would like to remember that 70% of cloud computing power in the world belong to one city, Seattle, almost the 100% to 5 companies. Well, the way in which we live this 10 years of AI infusion in computational system is one of the ways that will tell us what will remain of democratic and plural system around the world. I'm sorry, I'm an ethicist. I'm used to questioning technology and shut up before giving any kind of answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Benanti, very much. Next, we have Professor John Tasioulis. Dr. Tasioulis is Professor of Ethics and Legal Philosophy and the inaugural Director of the Institute for Ethics in AI at the University of Oxford, also a Senior Research Fellow at Balliol College in Oxford. He has published widely in the areas of moral philosophy, legal philosophy, political philosophy, and the philosophy of technology. He's currently engaged in an AI 2050 project on humanistic AI ethics, together with Professor Hélène Landemore at Yale University. Professor?
Thank you, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. Let me begin by thanking the Sovereign Order of Malta for giving me, a philosopher, the rare opportunity of speaking at the United Nations. It's also a special privilege to be co-keynote speaker with Father Benanti. I feel we both represent ancient institutions whose mission is to remind the world that there is more to the human condition than is revealed by natural science, and more to human values than the false god of efficiency. To the question whether moral and ethical boundaries can be applied to AI systems, the answer is obviously yes. These systems have dramatic implications for the quality of life on this planet, and these implications are not emanations of some inexorable process over which we have no control, but are shaped at every turn by human choices. However, the first question in ensuring an ethical AI is not what boundaries it mustn't transgress, but what positive good it achieves. And the answer that a humanistic ethic gives is that this good must be the promotion of human flourishing in a just manner. Central to human flourishing is the exercise of our characteristic human powers, in particular, our capacity to bring our actions, thoughts, and feelings into alignment with a genuine grasp of values, correct values, in domains such as personal relations, work and play, and political decision-making. This is why the advent of AI is such a momentous spiritual challenge. For the first time in history, we have a technology that can systematically simulate those activities, from composing a poem to diagnosing an illness, that for humans require the exercise of the very rational capacities that are central to our dignity as a species. So the ultimate question is, how do we ensure that AI technology is integrated into human life in a way that enhances the quality of our lives? And a secondary question is, given inevitable disagreement about that first question, how and by whom should the key decisions about AI technologies be made? And to this secondary question, my answer is that these decisions need a democratic resolution. Technological advance does not automatically generate widespread and equally shared benefits for all. It requires giving a voice to all those affected by the technology and to all those who stand to benefit from it. In short, in seeking to integrate AI into our lives, the flourishing of all is the ultimate end, and democracy is the key means. But we face serious obstacles in following this prescription. And here I want to highlight the way that the hype around AI technology distorts our conception of our own nature, of our problems, and of our values. Our conception of our own human nature is liable to be distorted because virtually all the leading AI companies have as their goal the development of artificial general intelligence, which is an AI system that can simulate human intellectual capabilities across their entire spectrum. This goal will create pressure, strong ideological pressure, to blur important differences between humans and AI systems so that it seems that the goal has been achieved. It will lead to a rhetoric that ascribes genuine understanding and autonomous agency to AI systems, when in fact they are very far from having the kind of understanding and autonomy that humans possess. Large language model like GPT-3 operates by identifying statistical patterns in a vast corpus of data. But such correlations yield no real understanding of what, for example, a cat is or an electron is. Humans have genuine understanding of the world, partly through our embodied engagement with the physical reality. Humans also have the capacity for rational autonomy, to stand back from any goal given by their own desires or by social pressure, and to ask the question whether it's worth pursuing and in what way. This is very different from optimizing for the fulfillment of an objective function that has been programmed into an AI system. The ideology around AI also threatens to distort our understanding of the serious problems that confront us. There is a risk that we will increasingly, even unconsciously, tailor our problems to the capacities and limitations of AI systems. So, for example, risk assessment AI tools are promoted in the criminal justice system on the basis that the decision, for example, whether to grant an accused bail ultimately turns on a prediction as to whether they are likely to offend if released. The claim is that the AI tool beats the human judge in making such predictions. But what if the bail decision implicates a multiplicity of considerations, including the severity of the offense or the impact on the accused's family, that need to be balanced against each other? Can the AI system carry out this balancing of values? And even if it could, why assume that there is one optimal way of striking the balance? A third threat is to our values themselves. Proposals for using AI systems are overwhelmingly advanced on the basis that they will produce valuable outcomes, such as correct cancer diagnoses or good hiring decisions, at least as good as those produced by humans, but far more efficiently. But this relentless focus on valuable outcomes ignores important values that are centered on the process through which valuable outcomes are achieved. For example, at work, we want not just to produce valuable goods and services and to be paid for them, both valuable outcomes. We also want to do so through a process that involves achievement, requiring the exercise of judgment, skill, cooperation, and other virtues. So receiving a universal basic income, when automation gets rid of all the jobs, won't fully compensate us for the loss of those opportunities. And we value democratic procedures, not just because they tend to produce better decisions, which historically they do, but also because they inherently respect the freedom and equality of our fellow citizens by giving them an equal voice in shaping our life in common. And here, work and democracy are intimately related, because democracy presupposes an egalitarian ethos in which citizens can look each other in the eye as equals. One reason they can do so is that they all contribute to our life in common through work, which fosters a sense of mutual dependence among citizens. These ideological effects of the AI revolution go hand in hand with another important aspect of it, which Father Benante mentioned, and that is the massive power shift from governments to corporations. As a result, corporations are increasingly exercising governmental powers such as administering justice, overseeing elections, but without the transparency needed for robust democratic accountability or the compliance with the rules that we normally expect that should govern the exercise of such powers, such as the rule of law and human rights. But enough of the daunting challenges. Let me conclude with 3 proposals for meeting them. In this respect, I'm more foolhardy than Father Benante. First, we must resist the repeated assertion that the AI revolution demands a corresponding revolution in our ethical and legal framework. We do not have to start from scratch in tackling the profound challenges of AI, but from principles already embedded in our philosophical and political traditions. However, there will be a need to reinterpret, modify, and perhaps add to these existing principles. One idea that merits serious consideration is a new human right for the age of AI, a right to a human decision. This right does not entail a blanket ban on automated decision-making. Rather, it stands for the idea that there are some decisions which only a human should take, or that there are some decisions which may be taken by an AI system, but that humans should have a right to opt out in favor of a human decision-maker, or else a right to appeal to a human decision-maker. Second, we have to re-examine the division of labor between governments and corporations and the obligations applicable to each in order to address the power shift that I mentioned. You might say this idea is already implicit in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which impose human rights obligations directly on corporations. But those principles, I would submit, are already under strain, partly because they assume that corporations do not perform governance functions, although they increasingly do, and partly because we cannot automatically impose obligations that were crafted for the state onto corporations. Finally, I return to the theme of democracy because I believe it offers the most promising path to ethical AI. But I want to stress two features of the kind of democratic participation we urgently need. The first is that we cannot be limited, this participation cannot be limited simply to the formal process of lawmaking, but must extend to other consequential decisions, including those within the corporate sector. It is commendable, for example, that Meta established an oversight board to adjudicate its content moderation decisions for compliance with the right to free speech. But why use a panel of a dozen legal and other experts for this governance function and not a wider group of stakeholders, including users of its platform and its own workers? Why not allow these stakeholders to adopt different standards for different regions that reflect varying cultural and other circumstances? The second point is that AI may be part of the solution to the problem it itself poses. We need a more radical democratic approach that directly empowers citizens to engage in deliberation and decision-making. Only this will stem the disillusionment that drives many citizens to embrace exclusionary populism. But enabling democratic deliberation at scale is a real challenge. This is where pro-democratic AI tools could come into their own, providing citizens with information tailored to their individual learning styles, moderating deliberative exchanges online, identifying points of consensus across different demographic groups. We already have powerful examples of this sort of pro-democratic AI in the pioneering efforts of the Taiwan government and its use of the open source software tool Polis. Finally, I would humbly submit that we do not need more declarations of abstract principles sketching the contours of a high-tech utopia. Such declarations offer limited practical guidance. What we most urgently need is to find ways for the voices of all those affected by the AI revolution to play an effective role in shaping its direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tassioulis, for both those interventions. We're now going to move to our panel, our distinguished panelists. I'll introduce each one before they deliver their remarks. We're going to start with, here at my left, Dr. Mohammed Ahmed. Dr. Ahmad is research scientist at Harborview Medical Center, adjunct professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Washington. His previous academic appointments were at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Minnesota, the Center for Cognitive Science at the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Population Center, and the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. His research focuses on algorithmic nudging at scale, simulation modeling, and personality emulation. He's currently working on the ethical and technical issues around the use of AI surrogates in end-of-life decision-making. Certainly a very pressing issue for us all. Professor?
Excellencies, ambassadors, and distinguished guests, thank you for having me at the panel at the United Nations today. 2 decades ago, Mark Anderson stated that software will eat the world. This adage now reflects a new reality where artificial intelligence is re-engineering the social, moral, economic, and even psychological fabric of our lives. Ethical and moral questions that had vexed great scholars and thinkers of the past like Aristotle, Al-Farabi, Thomas Aquinas, Maimonides, and others have now become questions of engineering. We live in an era where questions of morality have also become questions of engineering. A case in point is the self-driving car, which could be put into scenarios where it has to decide whether it has to save one life at the expense of another life. Silicon Valley, which is at the center of development of AI, is dominated by secular ethos. And so one may rightfully ask the question, can religion contribute anything meaningful to the discussion? We answer in the affirmative. Religious traditions offer thousands of years of deliberation on ethical and moral issues. Let's consider the self-driving car again. In one of his treatises, Imam Ghazali, the 11th century Muslim theologian, talks about similar scenarios, but involving sailors and ship at sea. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. According to the Islamic tradition, God created man as his Khalifa or vice-regent, and thus the world does not truly belong to us, but it's a trust or amana from God. The trust is characterized by moral agency. Machine learning and AI systems are already infringing upon aspects of our moral agency as we are automating decision-making in a number of domains. Every day, billions of people are being nudged by algorithms to behave in certain ways and also think in certain ways. It is not because the AI systems are moral agents themselves, but because they have been designed to engender certain tasks and certain outcomes. And it seems that they can do that with extreme efficiency. The danger that I foresee is that in trying to make machines in the likeness of man, which AI seeks to do, we may end up recreating man in the likeness of the machine. Consider another area where AI and machine learning is having a great impact: social media, whose original promise was to bring people together. And one could argue that, yes, it did that initially. But if you look at the last decade or so, it has had the opposite effect. We now live in a society which is much more atomized, isolated, and depressed. We are entering an era where models that mimic human likeness and emotions are becoming increasingly common. People are getting addicted to chatbots for hours on end. The atomization continues. Imagine how the world look like in 5 years if this trend continues. As a counterpoint, the same technology can be used for other purposes, and I can speak from experience. I have been running a simulation of my deceased father for almost a decade. And the reason that I've been doing this is to engender feelings of familial bonds with my children, with their grandfather, who's not around anymore. A famous dictum in the Islamic tradition, first formulated by Yahya ibn Mu'ad al-Razi in the 9th century, is, "He who knows himself knows his Lord." This has been elaborated by Muslim theologians and philosophers over the course of centuries. And inspired by Plato's Republic, Al-Farabi in the 9th century in his treatise, The City of Felicity, approaches the question of self-cultivation and human flourishing as both an individual and a communal pursuit. In Farabi's view, societies have the natural goal of guiding their members towards true felicity and flourishing. 7 centuries after him, Mullah Sadra, another philosopher from Iran, envisioned a just society where each individual aligns with the collective good, ultimately fostering human flourishing. The Silicon Valley's way of accomplishing things is to move fast and break things. However, it does not work in scenarios where the thing one is breaking is human society. And one can analyze this in terms of objectives of the law. In the Islamic law, the objectives are characterized by 5 goals, known as maqasid al-sharia. These are protecting life, property, health, religion, and dignity. Then there's the question of responsibility. Who is to blame if AI system goes rogue? What if it negatively affects the quality of life of a person? Here one can also find precedents in medieval scholastic debates, not just the Islamic, but also in the Christian tradition. Debates around responsibility, let's say regarding beasts of burden, hunting animals, and human-induced behavioral change in animals, as discussed in Islamic law, or for other traditions for that matter. In other words, we do not have to reinvent the wheel for the questions that AI poses. Let me end with the acknowledgement that while I have talked about the Islamic tradition as singular, within this tradition there are multiple sub-traditions which have different implications for questions of interest. For example, on the question of the use of surrogates for end-of-line decision-making, one gets different answers and parameters for people of different religious and cultural traditions. While it is true that we bring our biases into AI, but we should also remind that we also bring values in our discussion when confronting AI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmad. And now we'll turn to Professor Nathalie Smua. Professor Smua is a legal scholar and philosopher at the KU Leuven Faculty of Law and Criminology, focusing on the intersection of law, philosophy, and technology. Her research spans EU and international law and examines legal and ethical questions around artificial intelligence and other digital technologies. She's particularly interested in the impact of AI on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. She's an adjunct professor at NYU Law, and her latest book is Algorithmic Rule by Law, coming out from Cambridge University Press. Besides her academic activities, she frequently advises governments and international organizations on AI policy. Previously, she worked at the European Commission, where she provided legal and policy assistance on the EU's AI strategy and acted as the coordinator of the high-level expert group on AI. Professor Smua.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. And one of the things that I already mentioned to the organizers is how glad I am that this is not just a so manyth AI conference, but that it has been given a particular angle that I have not yet encountered much. And I can tell you I'm speaking at a lot of AI conferences these days. And this is this interfaith angle, which I'm very glad that it's taking, that it's been given a place, because it is important. Now, this is not what I typically focus on in my day-to-day research, but I have been writing about how Jewish thinkers and Jewish philosophers can give some insights into our own thinking about AI governance. And so I'll share some of those perspectives. Of course, let me start by saying that there is not one Jewish perspective. There's so many different thinkers, so many different streams of thought. So I will just pick from some Jewish thinkers that I think might be relevant for our discussion today, which again shows that there is no need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of very interesting things have already been written and thought about for centuries, and we can draw on them when we are discussing things related to AI today. And I will focus on 3 points in particular, 3 points that are very relevant in Jewish thought and Jewish tradition, and that I think are relevant as well for our discussions on AI. And the first of these is the source of our meaning, where we draw meaning from in our lives. The second is the importance of alterity and plurality, rather than just having a monistic view about the world and about things in general. And the third is the emphasis not just on rights, but also on duties. So let me start with the first point. Jewish thinking, Jewish tradition emphasizes quite a lot the focus on relationality, the relationship we have with other subjects, with other human beings. And while, of course, God plays a big role there, if you see some of the ethical writing in Jewish tradition, Pirkei Avot, for instance, which is a very famous Jewish ethical part of the Mishnah, so teachings of rabbinical Jewish tradition, the very first Mishnah or teaching that you see there emphasizes the relationships that human beings have between each other. It's actually even more primal in a way than the relationships between human beings and God. So this point of view of the other, this face-to-face interaction with the other as a source of meaning in our lives is very central in that thinking. And Emmanuel Levinas, a French philosopher, a Jewish philosopher, also famously claimed that ethics is the first philosophy. It comes even before metaphysics or ontology, because our relationships to one another are so important. And acknowledging the face of the other, looking at the other, not turning your gaze away from them, especially when they're in need, but answering the call of the other is key. Now, this is something, if we now look at what this means for us in the age of AI, this is something we need to reflect upon. Because more and more, our interactions are being reduced to digital interactions and virtual interactions. We're no longer always seeing the face of the other and the appeal of the other, the needs of the other, when we're confronted with them. And, Mohammed just mentioned the fact that people are getting addicted talking to chatbots. I've been involved in a case of a suicide related to a chatbot. People are starting to form intimate relationships with chatbots. And sometimes this is by choice, because they're lonely and they're attracted to speaking with a virtual entity. But more and more companies, entities, even governments are pushing us towards interactions with chatbots because it's more efficient. So while AI and these technologies can, of course, help us when answering the needs of others, we need to be very careful that we don't lose the source of actual meaning of our lives as human beings, and that is being there for other human beings. It's not using technology. Technology is a medium, it's a tool, but it's not this entity of which we can derive meaning. So that's, I think, a first insight we should keep in mind. Let me move to the second one. And the second one is the attention given in Jewish thought to alterity, or the other, which I just mentioned, but also to plurality. And some of the Jewish thinkers that I've been analyzing, Franz Rosenzweig, a German philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas that I already mentioned, but also Hannah Arendt, a German-American thinker, try to push back against a more Hegelian conception that tries to systematize everything through reason, trying to fit everything monistically into a system. Because while that is, of course, interesting from a reason and thought perspective, when you're trying to push everything into one single system, you lose sight of the particularity and the individuality of other human beings, and hence also of their dignity, of what makes them unique. You stop treating them as unique human beings, but you're seeing them as a little keg into a bigger whole. And simultaneously, one of the things I mentioned, the Mishnah, Jewish writings, and one of the things you're seeing there, which is very interesting for a lawyer, is a tradition where rabbis disagree with each other on how to solve cases. But the interesting thing is that the Mishnah doesn't just say this is the solution and that's it. You see the different thoughts, the different perspectives of different rabbis arguing with each other, debating with each other. There's a logical discussion going on there, and it shows that you can interpret texts in very different ways. And again, this plurality of thinking, this plurality of interpretation is key. Now, bringing all this back to the age of today and to the age of AI, we see that there is a risk, because AI systems are at their most powerful when they can systematize data, when they can categorize us into boxes, when they numericize us, datafy us, right? There is a risk that for the sake of efficiency, we are no longer seen as individual human beings, but as data points that correlate with other data points. And we are being systematized. And if you are an outlier, if you don't fit into the model of the algorithmic system, you're invisible. Too bad for you. And we also see that this plurality of thought is getting pushed out. Father Benanti spoke about the centralization of systems, right? And I imagine many of you have tried out ChatGPT. If you haven't, have a go at it because it's interesting to see what it does. But more and more people rely on ChatGPT for their writing. More and more people are now writing in exactly the same way. And more people are starting to think in the same way. So we need to make sure that amongst the benefits that this technology gives us, we don't lose sense of authority, the individuality of other human beings, and plurality, the diversity of opinions that we need in our lives and in our societies. And then finally, a third point that I mentioned is the emphasis on not just rights, but also duties. So for those of you who are interested, there's a very good, it's an academic article, but it's short, I promise you, written by Robert Cover, who was a legal philosopher at Yale University many years ago. And it's called The Jewish Jurisprudence of Social Order. And what he does is he contrasts Jewish law, tradition, and Western thoughts. And he explains historically how in the West there's been a lot of emphasis on rights. You know, the Bill of Rights after the French Revolution, in the United States, and in many other countries. And that it comes with a lot of benefits. But then he explains that the core concept in Judaism is actually not rights, but duties, obligations, mitzvot. And in Jewish tradition, while rights also have a role, this emphasis, this primordiality of duties is actually very interesting. Because first of all, it makes it clear who bears responsibility for certain things. A right to education, for instance, is something many of us know and are familiar with, but it leaves a lot of questions open. Whom should you claim that right against? What does it mean? Where can you go get that right? In Jewish law, there is an obligation, a responsibility for parents to educate their children. There is an obligation on teachers to teach children, even sometimes for free. So focusing on duties really pinpoints who should be acting and in which way. And it also drives a sort of excellence. You want to excel in the duties you have, and you take those duties on as part of being a member of the community. As a member of the community, you don't just have rights, you also have obligations and duties. And while, of course, the argument here is not that we should do away with rights, we definitely need those today, I think when it comes to AI and some of the solutions to the problems that we just heard, focusing on duties can help us further. We need to make sure that the people who are developing AI systems, and AI systems don't come falling from the sky, right? There are human beings, companies, entities developing them, that they take up their duties, that they take up their responsibilities as well. And I think it's up to us to not just formulate new rights that we might need, but also duties and obligations that we need to impose on those who bring in these risks into our lives, because they are part of humanity. They are part of our social order. And there are certain responsibilities that come with that. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Smua. That was wonderful. And now we turn to our final panelist, Professor Benedetta Audia. Professor Audia is a professor of procurement in international development at George Washington University, a professor of contracting in international development at Fordham University, the Jesuit University of New York, and a law professor at Luis Guido Carli University in Rome. She has recently co-authored a book on the legal aspects of blockchain, and one of the courses she has developed examines the legal and ethical aspects of artificial intelligence, with a specific focus on the activities undertaken by the United Nations in this area. She is particularly interested in how the application of AI systems and applications impact on UN operations, and the potential for the misuse of AI in the administration of humanitarian initiatives sponsored by the UN and others. She's an attorney who was a chief legal advisor at the UN for 17 years, and she now heads the International Development LLC, a firm advising private sector companies in international development and business matters. Professor Audia.
Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is an honor and a pleasure being here this afternoon with such an esteemed panel. The issues and questions that have been addressed and discussed are critical in today's world. And what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon is the approach that the UN has taken with respect to artificial intelligence. And I'm going to look at it from a policy perspective. What are the policy documents that the UN has spearheaded and issued in relation to artificial intelligence? Then I'm going to talk about the practical application of these principles to concrete projects. And, given the introduction that was given, you may have seen that I'm an attorney and I am someone who always strives to find solutions to problems. So I'm going to talk about some of the issues and some of the solutions that may be found to address these issues. I have spent my entire career in the field working on projects that improve the lives of people in need. And I am a strong believer of the power that artificial intelligence has in improving the conditions of people around the world, but also the risks and the challenges that are inherent with the use of artificial intelligence. And so the UN, as you know, has had an approach towards AI which has been steadfast but also cautious. And the guiding principle of AI, as far as the UN is concerned, is not to become autonomous or to replace the vast amount of human intelligence, but rather ensure that artificial intelligence is developed through a humanist approach to facilitate rather than replace human-based innovation. And so in this light, the United Nations has been and continues to be hyper-focused on contending with the issues that could impact this human-focused approach to AI. The questions that the UN has been asking that are crucial to understand and to contend with the possible challenges of ensuring that moral and ethical boundaries be applied to AI are, first of all, how can we ensure that algorithms do not infringe fundamental human rights like freedom of choice and freedom of conscience? Second, how can we ensure that social and cultural stereotypes are not replicated in AI? Can values be programmed? And if so, by whom? How can we ensure that accountability is there when decisions or actions are fully automated? And the point about accountability and transparency, as you know very well, is very important, especially with respect to UN operations around the world. How do we make sure that any advancements in artificial intelligence are available to all? And finally, how do we ensure that AI is developed in a way that incorporates the opinions, the needs, the desires and the wishes of those who it affects the most? And so in addressing these ever-evolving questions, UNESCO has come up with 10 principles, 10 core principles that lay out a human rights-centered approach to the ethics of AI. Some of the key principles in the recommendation include, first of all, the respect for human rights. AI should respect human rights and freedoms. Fairness and non-discrimination. AI systems should be designed to avoid biases and ensure equity. Transparency. Decisions made by AI systems should be explainable and understandable. And then finally, a point which I've mentioned a couple of times, you'll hear me mention this again, accountability. Developers and users of AI systems must be accountable for their impact. And again, here I would like to echo Natalie's point about rights and duties. And there is an obligation to ensure that there is full accountability with respect to the use of AI systems. Other initiatives that have been spearheaded by the UN include the Secretary General's Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, the Global Partnership on AI, the UN Global Digital Compact. It was mentioned by the Permanent Representative and Ambassador of Monaco at the beginning, how this was part of the Summit of the Future. The role that the Human Rights Council has had in relation to artificial intelligence is also notable because it has highlighted the need for ethical AI practices within the context of human rights. And the Council has focused on privacy, the impact that AI has on employment, and also the point in relation to non-discrimination. And then I would also like to mention additional initiatives that have been undertaken by the United Nations. First of all, with the creation of the UN Secretary General Advisory Body, of the UN Panel on Digital Cooperation. And I would also like to mention the important work that is being undertaken by the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, which has been working on initiatives that ensure that AI technology does not contribute to the development of autonomous weapons or that undermines global security, promoting the ethical use of AI in the defense industry. Now, these are the initiatives that the UN has been taking on the policy side, but there have been some more practical applications of these principles, and I would like to mention a few, and then I would like to conclude with a few reflections on the role that the UN has in general with respect to its development and humanitarian mandate, and could have. So with respect to some of the initiatives that have been taken on the practical application of these principles, I'd like to mention the readiness assessment methodology that again has been put together by UNESCO, which helps guide countries in their preparedness for ethically implementing AI. The ethical impact assessment tool that again has been provided to help countries evaluate the benefits and the risks of AI. And finally, again, UNESCO's Women for Ethical AI. A few concluding remarks. We know very well that the United Nations has a significant role in promoting the ethical and responsible development of artificial intelligence. And so it is uniquely positioned to guide, influence, and facilitate international cooperation. In particular, the UN has a very important role in the area of capacity development, in the area of provision of technical assistance, but also in the actual implementation of projects that use artificial intelligence to improve the lives of people in need. It is often said that because the UN can't be an enforcer, its role is limited. I beg to differ with those who opine on this in relation to this point, because the UN does have an impact in several countries around the world that makes definitely a positive one. And so in addition to its policy-making role, artificial intelligence can certainly have quite an impact also in relation to practical and concrete applications on the ground. Thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this interesting discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our panelists and our keynoters for these immensely rich and deep presentations. I could barely keep up with my own notes. Two things. While we're, I'm going to throw a question out there, and as I do, and as I get our panelists to, speakers to respond, please raise your hand or give in your note cards with your questions. They'll bring them up to me, and I'll start to throw out some of your own questions. The one thing that strikes me very much is really what's the, we're talking about accountability, we're talking about enforcement, you're talking about how to create a world or a system where these things we're talking about here, ethical, humanistic, religious traditions on obligations and duties as much as rights, can be entered into the discussion. What is the framework? How can that happen? How can these sorts of things enter into the discussion that is so focused, doesn't often focus on that, if I read you correctly, Professor Samoa. Does anyone want to get that? Father Benanti.
Well, I can give you a couple of examples, not the definitive answer. The first example is given by the Rome Call for AI Ethics that happened in Rome in February 2020, just before the pandemic. And it developed and disseminated itself. It is an ethical call, bottom-up, signed by the Catholic Church, signed by Microsoft, IBM, FAO, and then in 2023, the High Rabbinate and the Forum for Peace from United Arab Emirates joined it, and in July 2024, a total of 21 different religious leaders signed the call, making it probably one of the most workable framework for inclusion and diversity in religions. And when the tech envoy of United Nations participated to such ceremony in Hiroshima, he simply said that Rome Call for AI Ethics is one of the models that United Nations are looking at to develop an inclusive framework. Then second example is while I'm in the board, the work of the board for AI here in United Nations terminate in November 24. Well, I was in charge to have a vertical panel with different religions, and we have different religious leaders that simply start to contribute with their own feeling on the document that was processed, and all the element was included inside the report that then was still elaborated and produced the final report at October 2024.
Yes, so this is quite a profound question, what the common framework could be. And I think the starting point, if you're have a humanistic approach, is we have a shared human nature. So before we even talk about rights or talk about duties, we talk about what is this shared human nature? What are the capabilities that define us? And then we'll see that there are things also that we need. Like we need to be in some sort of social interaction with others. We need to engage our rational capacities in various ways. We need to be protected from certain threats. This is a kind of platform that is shared across humanity. And then we can build from there to these other concepts. So I would sort of slightly disagree with Natalie about rights versus duties, because it seems to me if you have a right, that is a source for a duty. My right not to be tortured imposes duties on others. But where I would agree is rights aren't enough. So I'd have a problem, someone saying the framework is going to be exclusively a framework of human rights, as UNESCO suggests. So for example, if you're thinking about using some sort of care robot to look after your aged mother, is the question simply, will she respect my mother's rights? Aren't there other qualities we look for in a carer beyond respecting rights, like patience, kindness, playfulness? These are also very important values. So rights is part of the story, but it's not going to be enough. And equally, AI systems have a tremendous environmental impact. And again, that's not going to be cashed out in terms of human rights. The threat of the whale becoming extinct is not fundamentally a human rights issue. It's an issue about the whale. So a point where I would agree with Natalie is the point about pluralism. that it's very important to resist the temptation to think the framework is going to be given by some single overarching concept like trust or rights or whatever. There's a plurality of values. And once we recognize that, we recognize that there's a plurality of ways of striking a balance between these values. And that means there ought to be a lot of leeway for individual communities acting through democratic processes to shape for themselves the nature of their regulation, because it's highly unlikely that in balancing these values, there's going to be one unique, correct regulatory framework, although there'll have to be some minimal universal framework, in the same way that when you balance the values about which career to follow, it's highly unlikely that those values are going to single out one career as the single best career for you. So this point about pluralism is very important, and it brings to the fore the fact that however good our framework is, it won't go all the way to determining a solution. There has to be some element of human choice as well.
Yes, I just want to give some practical perspectives as well when talking about duties and how to make sure that we have this more balanced framework. And as a lawyer, the first thing you think about is binding legislation, right? And this is maybe also something that if we're allowed to also make questions to fellow panelists, I would like to throw in there. To which extent do we need, and is it feasible, plausible, to have not just recommendations and ethics calls, etc., but also a binding treaty. And of course, being here at the UN is a good place to discuss this thing. So, but it's not the only thing, right? I think having an international treaty or other binding obligations that explain, detail the duties we impose on those who bring in these risks is one thing. But I do think that recommendations and ethical calls have a role to play. But more importantly, I think when we think about the ethics of duties as well and how you can excel in duties, I think we need to bring back the idea that it's valuable intrinsically to comply with these duties. We need these companies, because it's mostly private companies, that are developing the technology and that are frankly using us as guinea pigs into the technologies that they're throwing at us. We need them to reflect upon what it means to be part of this world and take up responsibilities, because the law has its limits. Right? Not every law is enforceable, and these recommendations definitely also have their limits. So we need to strive towards having these players actually take their responsibility. And this needs to come from themselves as well, and not just from external texts.
I guess the question was directed to me. Yes, so the answer is absolutely yes to the potential of establishing an international treaty on the topic, given its relevance in today's world. But the UN also has a role in encouraging legislation as well, and influence national governments that adopt laws and regulations to adopt laws and regulations that would embed these principles into AI systems. And again, there are several programs that the UN already has in place to influence that, and certainly this could be a key component of it. And one last comment on this. We've talked a lot about centralization, localization, values. How can we have uniform values? The UN is grappling with these issues in relation to other areas and has been for decades. It is absolutely the expert in this area. And so the need to incorporate the interests of local communities while ensuring that global standards are followed is intrinsic in UN operations all around the world. And as such, I am a big proponent of entrusting the UN with this responsibility, because they are the most experienced body that has been handling these questions for decades.
I will address this both from an individual as well as organizational perspective. I think from the individual perspective, it makes sense to have guidelines and things which are internalized. So let's say, saying this from the perspective of a programmer. On the organizational level, and I hate to say this, having been worked in industry and Silicon Valley, that until and unless there's a penalty with respect to making the wrong decision, people are actually going to make the wrong decision. That's just the unfortunate reality of things. So in order to make corporations accountable, there has to be some sort of penalty. And I do recognize what Natalie was saying earlier, that laws are not enough. Everything which is lawful is not necessarily ethical. So that's why internalization of these values is important.
Thank you. In fact, you raised an issue which a couple of the questions have spoken about, which is corporate governance, because this is such a business model and frame, and that seems to be something on everyone's mind if anyone wants to contribute to that. Also, on a relatedly very concrete question, someone asks, how can we prevent military bodies from using fully autonomous weapons and systems, which AI-generated systems, which lower the cost of war, potentially making conflict more likely and more destructive? A tough one. Does anyone?
I can say something about corporate governance.
Okay.
So I mentioned in my talk about the UN guiding principles, which I think are a tremendously inspirational achievement, basically spearheaded by Professor John Ruggie at Harvard. And they say that corporations have human rights obligations irrespective of what the law says. And they're trying to reconfigure the corporate culture so that it doesn't think that its fundamental aim is merely profit maximization and then abiding by the law as the constraint on maximizing profit. This is incredibly important, but these principles are based on an assumption that corporations differ from states in that they don't exercise a governance function. And what AI technology and digital technology more generally has done is undermine that assumption, that increasingly corporations are now performing this governance function. That means we have to think a lot harder about what exactly the shape of their obligations are, and it may bring those obligations closer to the obligations that states have. And I think one of the questions then becomes, who gets to configure these obligations? And that's why I was suggesting in my talk that if you are, like OpenAI, claiming to be developing AI for humanity, how can it be that humanity doesn't get a voice in that development? How can you be standing in the shoes of humanity, determining what's right for humanity? So I think one of the things we could think about is, if this is the case, if there is this power shift, it has to be subject to democratic control, it has to be legitimate, and the way to do that is to have corporations have a different conception of themselves. And that's partly going to be achieved through law, but I think more fundamentally it has to be achieved through some kind of change in the ethos of these corporations. And I think a lot of people who work for them don't want to see themselves as monomaniacally pursuing profit maximization and only limiting their pursuit of that goal in order to comply with the law. They're ordinary human beings like the rest of us. They want to believe that what they're doing in their companies is for the common good, and their reward that they're getting is premised on the fact that it is for the common good. Well, I think we need to change that ethos. We need to have a more democratized form of corporate governance, and it could be that AI tools will help in that process. So think about Meta, where they've got these experts, and the experts assess content moderation decisions for compliance with the right to free speech. Question, why just the right to free speech? What about the right to just and favorable conditions of work? Why doesn't it scrutinize that? If we had the workers involved, they'd be saying, wait a second, there are so many people in the global south doing content moderation for Meta, being subjected to the vilest forms of content and images. What about their rights? So I think we really have to think in a much more ambitious way about the extent to which there can be democratic participation, not just formally in legislation, but also in democratic governance.
Thank you. I mean, I'm struck, that seems so much really response as the ESG, investing kind of parameters had been pushing until sort of recently with a certain turn in our cultures in a populist direction that had pushed corporations, because of their bottom line, to adopt some of those things. That seems like it's a cultural imperative as much as anything. If AI is incorporated into those what are traditionally thought of as climate-based sorts of things, environmental. We don't have much time left, but I did want to just throw out a question to one of the questions here. I love a very basic overall question. Is AI right now a net good or a net bad? And why? And I think that's a good one. You know, I kind of came in here looking at AI almost the way I do at climate change. It's something that just seems to be inevitable and moving faster than our ability to do all of these things that you all have sketched so profoundly. But climate change, global warming, is a bad thing by definition. AI is not by definition. So how would each of you respond to the idea of AI right now, net good or net bad? Father, throw it to you.
Thank you. Well, I think that we are facing the same problem from 60,000 years ago. 60,000 years ago, when we took a club stick in the cave, was it a tool or was it a weapon? So, you know, the double use of such kind of things cannot give us a result that is before the practical use in the history of these things. And also the way in which we are calculating the impact of the using of these tools has to be in a complex way, you know. Coming back to the ecological impact, yes, training a model today is a really huge energy consumption things. But the amount of energy that such trained model can save could be 10 times more. So it depends where you put the limit of your calculation. And here is the problem that no one now is accountable, or there is a standard way to count the impact of such kind of tools. And coming back to the idea of weaponization that is also connected to good or bad, my personal experience is that in everybody that would like to regulate or have a positive governance effect on AI, there is a caveat that is putting in the first line, except national security and defense. So national security and defense is something that has to be taken out of the table to start to have some kind of effect on the rest of the use of AI. And so, of course, in a so divided world, we can imagine that AI will be weaponized a lot of time, and is already weaponized. But if we would like to mitigate in some way the other effect, like energy consumption, biases, or other superpower given in hands that are not accountable, we have to try to mitigate at least other kind of use. And cannot be the efficiency of process the only judgment that we put in the using of AI. Because this is something that will produce a surrogation of process to a machine that is opaque, that is not transparent, and that can simply change the fundamental ratio that we put when we build such kind of process. And so it's time to be part of such discussion. It's not time to have easy answer on that. And the problem is, because AI is so fast, because the transformation is so fast, what we have to imagine is an open table of discussion, that not something that you can deploy and forget, and is valid for AI. And this asks a changing of paradigm also. It's not just, you know, when you have nuclear weapon and you can say we have a treaty and it's gone. Is an ongoing process, a complex ongoing process, with different actors, with different kind of access, and with a different effect, because, you know, if the open source AI model will spread in society, you don't have a company that is accountable, but you have a huge number of users that has this last technology and they can use such technology from bioweapon to everything else. And so this is a really complex scenario that needs complex solution. I think that there is just one mistake to oversimplify the problem and oversimplifying the problem to not give to this kind of conjunction the correct perspective to be handled in a really global and effective way.
Anyone else want to tackle the yes or no, good or bad? Natalie?
Yes, I'll try to be brief. So I think it's of course an interesting question, but I think the main problem for me with that question is that it sees AI as one uniform big thing. And that is perhaps part of the problem. We call everything AI nowadays, and that makes it very difficult to distinguish useful and less useful or more problematic purposes. And so I would like to take an invitation for all of us, and I catch myself doing the same, right? So for all of us to try to be more specific, because if we say, is it overall good or bad to have a system that helps doctors diagnose patients in a more accurate manner, I think we can answer the question faster. Is it overall better or good to have Spotify suggesting songs that you might like? It's very different from would it overall be good or bad to have an AI system that can meticulously target people that have been claimed to be terrorists, for instance. So I think we need to drill down to the specific applications. Because as long as we keep talking about the level of AI and regulating AI and is AI good or bad, we're not coming to the practical and concrete applications, and it makes it very difficult to find solutions as well. Now, of course, one big issue where AI is very different from climate change is that it is something that is in our hands. As I mentioned, AI does not come falling from the sky. It's not like an alien coming to our planet. It's human beings that develop it. It's human beings that shape it. And so human beings also have the power not to develop it, or to develop it in certain ways and not in others. And it's very important to keep that power that we have in mind, because sometimes we forget about it. Sometimes we feel, or we make it seem as if it's a fait accompli, something we can't do anything about. But that is not the case. So we have that power and we need to use it wisely.
Just very quickly, I very much agree with that. There's no point in asking whether AI per se is good or bad. In itself, it's probably good because it's a form of knowledge about the world. But the real question is, as Natalie said, what are the applications? And what are the applications we can actually point to where it's actually achieving some good? So one application I would point to is DeepMind's AlphaFold, where they've created a system that can unravel the structure of a protein within days. And this would normally take a doctoral student 3 years to do. That is genuine progress. It's AI doing something that is genuinely valuable. But what was AI doing during COVID? Was it helping people avoid being in dangerous situations, taking on tasks of delivering needed supplies to people and so forth? It wasn't. AI is heavily involved in things like sucking up people's attention online, getting them to buy meaningless consumer goods. So the key point is not about the technology itself, but how we're using it, who gets to decide. And that's why I think if we want it to be used for pro-human ends, then we need to have the wider spectrum of humanity engaging with that rather than some subset of powerful individuals who are insulated from a sense of commonality with the rest of us.
I'm an optimist, so you'll always hear me give a positive answer. So just quickly to address the question, yes, it is certainly good with a number of caveats. We've talked about the positive application of AI, and I'd like to mention the application which hasn't been talked about so far in relation the role that it is having in relation to the prediction of weather patterns, and that is truly life-saving. So, for instance, an initiative that is aimed at preventing the loss of lives and damage to properties, the Early Warnings for All initiative, and it is an initiative where AI is truly making a difference because it does allow people to be alerted in the event of adverse climate events, and so it is potentially life-saving. We've talked about the risks, we've talked about the challenges, and perhaps I can conclude by going back to Natalie's point in relation to duties. AI itself does not have intrinsic morals or ethics. It is for us humans to have a responsibility to embed these considerations into the design, the development, and the deployment of AI systems.
Thank you. Final word, Dr. Ahmad.
Another way to ask the question of whether it's good or bad is to talk in terms of trade-offs, because technologies may not necessarily be good or bad. We should also look at the trade-offs. So think of the automobile. So 100 years ago, at the dawn of the 20th century, we could have asked, is automobile good or bad? Well, now more than 100,000 people die because of car accidents. That's definitely a negative, but at the same time, it has allowed literally billions of people to connect with one another, to go to work. The world is much more interconnected. The other thing that I would add is that there are other aspects of this technology that we should be mindful of. So, for example, think of nuclear weapons. It's a technology which is 80 years old almost, and yet even now, even with this old technology, it takes a massive amount of infrastructure and expertise to replicate it. That's not true for digital technology, including artificial intelligence. Once you have trained the model, it can easily be replicated and go from one place to another place. And there's a potential to, let's say, bioengineer weapons. So again, going back to our earlier discussion, at the end of the day, I think the discussion is going to be around having these guardrails and also internalizing these values.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for this terrific discussion. I think this is the paradigm of the open table, as Father Benanti put it, and I hope this is the start of a discussion that kind of continues in this form and in this frame. Thank you to our co-sponsors. Thank you especially to our host, the Order of Malta, the Permanent Observer, and I will toss it back to the Ambassador for a final word.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, David. Mohammed mentioned just a few minutes ago about how the car, the automobile, good or bad. Bad, obviously, yes, in the hundreds of thousands of people killed through automobile accidents. However, good in a way that, yes, it did improve communication. Bad in a way in that it led to the destruction of closed, smaller communities, which were obviously then spread out, and with communication, people moved away and such like. The same can be said of any form of industrialization. Look at the Industrial Revolution, look at the spinning jenny, and look at the action of the Luddites, whose prime intention was to destroy the machinery that ultimately was going to make and give so much to the world and so much to the world's economy. We don't often see the potential of things that are right in front of us. Sometimes for all of us, maybe the question comes sometime after the answer. And as with artificial intelligence, the goodness and the badness, as pretty much everyone has said here today, is related to how human beings use something that they have created. We are the generators of artificial intelligence. We are the ones who will give it the life that it is going to inhabit and that it is going to use, either for our benefit or not. Remember Oppenheimer and his comment about the atomic bomb, the destroyer. This is the intelligence of human beings that put this together. Do we want to create another atomic bomb that has much wider and much more dramatic and perhaps much more even destructive capabilities? Or do we want to use our intelligence and our knowledge to both contain, manage, and at the same time use the technologies that we create for our benefit and for the benefit of all humanity. That's the purpose of the United Nations, to bring these things to our attention. It's a debate which is continuing, which will continue, and which will echo through the corridors of this and other chambers throughout the world. My hope is that by sharing with you the thoughts of our speakers this afternoon, we will encourage more thought, more consideration, more discussion, and that all of us will come away from this meeting perhaps a little bit the wiser, a little bit more sensible to the potential of what is in front of us, and a little bit more questioning about the easy answers that are sometimes presented. On behalf of the Sovereign Order of Malta, on behalf of the Principality of Monaco, and on behalf of our speakers, I thank you all, and Archbishop Katia, I thank you for the support of the Holy See and the work of the Holy Father in bringing the moral and ethical implications of AI very much to the forefront. And I would just finalize by saying that the idea for this event came from the Holy See, because about a year ago, you organized an event on artificial intelligence, which really got me thinking that this was an issue which needed to be stressed more and brought to more people's attention. And I thank you for that. Thank you all very much.